Welcome to the Dialectic. I'm Atul Singh, the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer. I'm the Rajput. With me is retired CIA officer Glenn Carle and senior partner at FOI. He's the WASP. Today, we will dive into Germany. In fact, we are going to discuss a very important topic. Can Germany outgrow its post-war American model? And before we crack on, we must thank two people. First and foremost, our friend, our editor at large at Fair Observer, Alex Gloy, who's a brilliant economist, who is a fantastic human being, and who has helped us a lot. Like many who've come before us, we like sitting and standing on the shoulders of giants. That helps us sound clever and perhaps gives you some insight as well. And the other person I must thank is my Bavarian friend, the very first person I met at Oxford, the great Nikolai Leski. And so, Nico, if you're listening, thank you very much for the many discussions on Germany over the years. I've learnt a lot. And so now that I have thanked the two people who've helped us, Glenn, why are we discussing this today?
Well, the world is in, if not turmoil, certainly in dramatic change from Washington to Beijing and all points between, and the points halfway between. The center of the world, from an Anglophile and Europhile like myself, remains Europe. And Germany is both geographically and by most other measures at the center and the heart of Europe. We're all aware that many countries are experiencing political, economic, social turmoil. The geopolitical system is evolving, changing, disaggregating, reaggregating all simultaneously. And so we really should, all of us, take a look at the factors weighing upon how Europe will evolve, and that brings us right to Germany at the center of Europe, the engine of Europe, maybe the future of Europe, and maybe the despair.
Excellent. So, with such a pithy and precise introduction, let's dive into context as we always do. So, the podcast will have a three-part structure. We'll try to lay out the context. After that, we will go into current challenges, and then we will discuss future scenarios. So on to context, and I'm going to rifle through many decades here. And so obviously we'll miss out stuff. And those of you who think we've missed out something important, write to us. Let's begin. We are talking about post-war Germany, so we won't go into the unification of Germany, 1871, Bismarck. We won't go into the disaster of World War I, the tumult of the interwar years, the rise of Nazism, yada yada. Let's begin with total defeat in 1945. What happens?
Atul, let me stop you right at that sentence. Just, I think, to give some perspective to people who are earlier in the life cycle than I, and that's most people now, unfortunately. And I have in mind my children. I have said to them, now I'm an American, obviously. I was born after World War II in the country that was the least affected and most successful, benefited the most from the horrors of World War II. But I've told my children, and it's absolutely the truth, I've tried to impress upon them that World War II decided everything in my life, in American society growing up, from the assumptions we made about the place of America, the role of an individual, how the world worked economically, socially, and politically, to pop culture, everything. And that was for me as an American. Now, if you're a German, Atul will describe that is even more the case.
Exactly. And Glenn, at some point, we can even one day discuss your mother-in-law's story, whose life was completely shaped by World War II, and who had the trauma of watching bombs land on her lawn.
Absolutely, yes. She saw combat, and I'm speaking literally here, from 1 meter away. She
Yeah.
stood beside the Tommies as they fought,
Mhm.
fired their weapons at the Japanese and vice versa
Exactly, and
as
she's
a young
Chinese.
girl.
She's Chinese, and of course this pertains to the Japanese invasion of Hong Kong. But our focus is Europe, and World War II perhaps affected no other country as deeply, as dramatically, and as decisively as Germany. At the end of 1945, Berlin lay in ruins. It was rubble. Uh, Germany was partitioned into West and East Germany. In those days, GDR, if I remember correctly, and FRG, Federal Republic of Germany, and German Democratic Republic. When I was really young, I used to go to trade fairs to get books, and there would be FRG stands and GDR stands. And I was always confused as a little child. And I'd ask my father, why are there two Germanys? And of course, I was growing up in India, and we'd be picking up material from both. So I have a lot to thank for when it comes to my father. He gave me a very worldly education in a third world country. But the important thing here is even as far away east as India, which is a naturally insular or more insular society than others, we were very conscious of the division of Germany. And in Germany, my German friends tell me that there was a real sense of shame. There was a sense of uh, uh, crisis and fear. A nuclear war was a specter. Germany was a frontline state in the Cold War. It was divided into two. The Berlin Wall was a potent symbol of division. I remember the Soviets and their German lackeys commenced building this wall on August 13, 1961, and it stood till November 1989. So this frontline state against the Soviet Union uh, attracted a lot of American attention, and America
So,
decided. Yes, please, sir.
yeah, I'd like to jump in. So, 1945, Germany, which had been the greatest power in Europe, is utterly destroyed. 1/3 of all the buildings in Germany, in the entire country, 1/3 of the material stock had been destroyed by the Soviets or by the Allies, the British and the Americans primarily. 8 million, I think that's 10% or 15% of the entire population had been killed. Many millions more had been made refugees. And the objective of all of the victors, the Soviet Union, the British, and the Americans, and the French, was that never again would Germany rise to trouble anybody. And there was talk of actually breaking Europe up, breaking Germany up into a bunch of little principalities once again, so that it could never cohere and be a threat, of deindustrializing the country and obliging all Germans only to grow to be farmers. Now, the Soviet Union did part of that by literally putting on trains and taking most of the industrial park of the parts of Germany that the Soviets controlled back to the Soviet Union. But the point is that Germany was prostrate, and was the victors viewed it and hoped to make it a clean slate, to move Germany beyond what was perceived as its militarism and its totalitarian nature. These are debatable points, but that's what drove the war, and that's the point from which Atul will describe 1945.
Yes, I'll add one more thing. It just occurred to me, Glenn, is that yes, all of this happened, but also, whilst we focus a lot on the terrible actions of the Nazis, the ethnic cleansing they committed, the horrific industrial slaughter of millions of Jews and minorities, what we forget quite often is how the Soviets were pretty savage to the Germans in during World War II and in the aftermath as well. There was a lot of rape of German women. There was often uh, arbitrary execution, and the Soviets, being the Soviets, this was all covered up by propaganda. The Allies treated the Germans a lot better, but even there, sometimes there were odd incidents. But on the whole, the Allies treated the Germans extraordinarily well. And the US decided not to be punitive, not to reduce Germany into a nation of farmers, but under the Marshall Plan, rebuild Germany. And the US came up with a German model for this country. And in this model, Germany was to be a federal country, a federal democracy. Germany was to have a constitutional democracy, an elected president, a parliamentary system, and Germany was to focus on economic development, but security was to be with the US and other allies, other victorious allies. In fact, in the early days, Germany was divided into the American, British, and French spheres of influence, and then it was united. The defense policy was, let's begin with defense. Defense policy was totally defined by NATO, which, in the words of a wit, was designed to keep Russia out, Germany down, and America in. And the US defense posture for Europe was containment of the Soviet Union, of course. Article 5, a defense on one is, an attack on one is an attack on all. And there were to be no defense actions independent of NATO. Ergo,
by Germany.
Yeah,
right.
By Germany. Ergo, independent of the US. So Germany's... Please, Glenn.
This is so much the case. So the only date we've mentioned so far is 1945, the end of the war. But I was a graduate student 40 years later. Was it 40 years later? 30 something years later. And one of the papers that I did as a grad student was on German defense policy, because I was a European studies. That was my concentration as a graduate student. And German defense policy in the 1970s, in fact, from 1949, when it began to have a defense policy again, up until the fall of the Berlin Wall 44 years later, was utterly subsumed into NATO, which meant the American policy of containment. It had no independent defense policy. It had defense capabilities, but no policies whatsoever other than complete integration to and coordination with and subordination to, ultimately, the US and NATO.
Excellent. And so when it comes to foreign policy as well, it was subsumed in NATO. And foreign policy, because of EU integration, which we discussed in our last podcast, we went through a timeline, how France and Germany combined, first the economic coal and steel community, and so on and so forth. Foreign policy was also largely run by Brussels. It was basically the French who ran foreign policy largely for Europe. This is not to say that Germany didn't have any foreign policy. Of course it did, but German focus was largely domestic, was largely internal. And Germany, as Glenn has said, Germany was the engine and France the conductor of Europe. So this de facto meant that economic development with very halting political integration or unity, especially with when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to even Europe, which pleased the US, although the US would not say so. So let's now talk about the economic model. And this is where the German miracle is real. It is one of the most extraordinary achievements in history, along with the Japanese miracle. The German model developed under the American umbrella, obviously a population shattered by war, had extraordinary work ethic. There's something to be said for good old Max Weber, the Protestant work ethic, and the spirit of capitalism. There is more than an element of truth to his work. Both Glenn and I are fashionably Weberian rather than Marxist. And those of you who don't agree with us can leave your comments and criticize us as two old fogies. But
well, there can be no disagreement.
For anybody sensible, of course. Uh, uh, but let's talk about the export-led growth model and now the German economic model. The focus was on industry, but it was on peaceful industry. The focus was on a new form of collaborative capitalism, wherein you had unions having their workers having their boards, management having its board, everyone working together in hard times, everyone sacrificing a bit rather than the antagonistic shareholder capitalism of the Anglo-Saxon world. It was also the Mittelstand, the small and medium-sized industry, that provided Germany its extraordinary industrial might, because this meant that there'd be a world-leading industry. Let's take the example of Faber-Castell in a small town, excellent writing instruments, or take any of the wonderfully high-quality German products that people use, whether it is mics, which opera singers use, or kitchen appliances. These would all be scattered in these small and medium-sized industries around the country. A very different model, dare I say, to the dirigist model of France.
Oh, well. This is the has for decades, or was for decades, viewed as the genius of the German model, which is that it became in some ways a corporatist economic model. It was the marriage of uh, capital, labor, or business, labor, and government, literally on boards. Such as Volkswagen and other corporations, where policies for the businesses would be coordinated, and where they focus on export-led economic growth and decentralization of the political process into its federal, but even a confederal level of government existence. And it led to 40 years of the miracle. Now, one comment to lest one think that American policy was this triumph and enabled Germany to become the Wunderkinder. It's really a revert to the status quo ante World War I and World War II. Germany had been the scientific, technological leader of the world, really, certainly from the 1880s on, and its production levels of then leading economic indicators, steel, shipbuilding, and so on, and GDP growth rates on which there was less focus at the time, but nonetheless, that's a fact. So it really is a recovery from the destruction of World War II to what Germany had already been.
Excellent, excellent. So, um, this model, this extraordinary industrial model, produces more than what Germany can consume. A German demand obviously cannot meet German supply. So Germany turns to exports, and German exports of high quality goods all around the world power the German economy. In fact, in 2022, um, German exports as share of the GDP were as high as 46%. Think about it. Let that sink in. I mean, even for the US, that figure is well below 20%. Uh, for most economies, that figure is below 10%. So this is an extraordinarily uh, externally exposed economy. Should global demand slump, German economy suffers. So even in 2024, which is last year, uh, the exports comprised, or German exports comprised 42% of the GDP. So yes, they've declined by 4% in 2 years, but even today, almost every second euro in the German economy depends on exports. And this is extremely important to note. So Germany has become this democracy after 45, has become the Wunderkinder, as Glenn said, and Germany has basically retreated from defense and foreign matters, ceding them to the US and to a lesser degree France, and 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 then the world changes. Glenn, why don't you tell us about the
Right.
changing world?
Well,
Because you were there in Europe and you were there in Strasbourg.
for the first part of my career, the United States had 350 or 400,000 soldiers in Germany. I would go to American bases all the time. The British had and the French had, respectively, I think each 100,000 soldiers or so in Germany. So that's well over 500,000 Allied soldiers in Germany because Germany was cut in half with, and Europe was, with the called the Berlin Wall, but the dividing line, which literally was a wall and barbed wire and minefields and so on, and watchtowers, separating what's now Central Europe, used to be called Eastern Europe, from the West, which cut right through Germany, about 160 kilometers or so west of Berlin.
Dogs as well.
But then the world.
Not to forget dogs and searchlights.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I crossed the border. I went into Czechoslovakia during the Cold War, and it took the train stopped at the border of Germany and Czechoslovakia, and the border control took over 2 hours. All of our luggage, every piece of every person's luggage, was searched by guards and dogs, sniffer dogs. I always wondered what a socialist, what a a capitalist newspaper must smell like for a dog, but I don't know. In any event, they searched. Um, so that was the world. But then the world changed. Now, the dramatic event, of course, is the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989. um, Preceding this, however, were several changes that made that event occur, possible and then occur. And they were that the Soviet Union had become sclerotic and imploded. Uh, and at this point, Germany has started to feel the effects of the demographic shifts from the post-war baby boom years, as they're called in the U.S., where birth rates were well above replacement level, populations were increasing, GDP growth was everywhere 3 and 4% among the developed nations. Living standards were dramatically going up, and so was the ability, it seemed, of states to address their social issues. But then the birth rates fell, along with the Berlin Wall. The October war in the Middle East between Israel and Arab Muslim countries occurred, which caused the rise of oil prices from 1973 on, lastingly. And the demographic shifts and the increase in price of energy led to ended the 30 glorious, the Trente Glorieuses, as the French called them, the post-war boom of growth. And this started to stress all economies, and this is why, specifically now, we are talking about the challenges to Germany and whether it can evolve past them. So Germany became what some people called, I think inaccurately, but nonetheless indicative of changed reality, the sick man of Europe. At the same time that, or succeeding the end of the end of the Cold War, the end of demographic growth, the end of high growth rates, the rise in energy costs globally, which has a lasting damping effect on economic growth worldwide. You have China also emerging from the communist, Marxist, Maoist stultification. Yes, sorry, Atul.
Not at all. Glenn, so, let's make it very clear that uh, Berlin Wall falls on 9 November 1989. And of course, those who are older talk about it. Even I remember it vividly, and it was just staggering watching it. It was unbelievable. Remember, India was a socialist country, and for us, it was wow. And the East comes back into the fold. By 1991, Germany is reunited. And remember, Maggie Thatcher is still prime minister. She remains prime minister till, I think, 91 or 92, if I remember correctly.
91.
91.
Just 91.
Just 91. And she's still prime minister. She has misgivings about it. The French, also Mitterrand, I think François Mitterrand
Oh, absolutely.
has misgivings about it. And please,
The mainstream view was that now that the Berlin Wall had fallen, what do we do about Germany? Oh my God! Once again, Germany might become German, and we have to keep it into two states. Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, felt that way. I, by complete coincidence, stood directly behind her last day as Prime Minister, and there was a debate she was attending in Paris on what should happen to Europe, and she flew back to the Houses of Parliament and was overthrown that afternoon. Mitterrand was opposed to unification. I was very, who am I? I'm a young nothing. But, I shared that sort of mainstream view. And to the credit of then President Bush, George H.W. Bush, the father, he was determined that Germany be allowed to reunify. And it's largely thanks to him that it happened successfully, quickly, and as seamlessly as one probably can do that. Sorry for my interruption.
Not at all. I mean, you had a ringside view to history. I mean, you were right behind Maggie Thatcher, Glenn, on the day she was overthrown. I mean, you never cease to amaze me. Anyway,
the fear was, and here's a pithy comment. You quoted an MI6 officer. There was a French foreign minister, I think it was André François Poncet, who was from the 1930s, I believe. I might be misattributing this, but a French foreign minister said, "Here's the German problem." And he said the problem with the Germans is that if you scratch a German, you find a German underneath, which means that they will always, as soon as they unify, and another saying was, as soon as the Germans unify, they march to Paris. So there's a terrible fear of Germany's power and ambitions to be the imperial leader of Europe, which President Bush made possible to overcome. And I will say, in hindsight, which a view I came to share pretty quickly, that he was a great statesman. He was correct. And Thatcher, Mitterrand, and the likes of me, our fears were looking backward rather than to the present and the future.
I have always been a great fan of Bush Sr. I think he's underrated. It's a pity he was president for only one term. I think few people understood foreign policy, geopolitics, world affairs as well as he did, and how he managed the collapse of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany, and indeed the Gulf War is extraordinary. But
I agree. But then to continue. So the Cold War ends. This is revolutionary for Germany.
Germany reunifies under Helmut Kohl. And Helmut Kohl does a pretty good job. He manages different parties quite well. We have to give him great credit. He manages to allay the fears of the Germans and the French to some degree. And of course,
fundamental reconciliation with Germany, with France by Helmut Kohl.
Exactly,
it was an act. Kohl and Bush were truly statesmen who rose to an world historic moment, and one must say that François Mitterrand also did. He changed his views and embraced utter reconciliation with Germany. So that changed, but what else is happening at the same time?
Very quickly, internationally, let me just mention the economics. But as in every apple, the seed, the worm often is in the seed. So the 1:1 exchange of German and East German currency is a big drain and strain on West Germany. They bring in a certain national minimum wage and same regulatory standards in East Germany as in West Germany. And our friend Alex Gloy points out that whilst there is a nationwide mandatory minimum wage, Euro 12.82 for 2025, minimum wage differs by region. So that is indeed true, but there is a nationwide mandatory minimum wage. So this means that suddenly now German wages are higher than Polish wages or Slovakian wages or Czech wages and so on and so forth. So East Germany, uh, the coming in of East Germany also leads to more fiscal expenses because the infrastructure is rotten. The East German economy under Soviet management was bled dry, and of course, command and control economics never works. And the Germans took the Soviet model and made it worse. They had Stasi. Basically, everyone was spying on everyone, and family members were spying on family members, and it was a fundamentally dysfunctional economy. And so West Germany now is spending a lot of money to rebuild infrastructure in East Germany, and German economy, in addition to all the factors Glenn just said, the post-war generation, the baby boomers have gone, so demographic challenges, energy costs going up. Germany becomes the sick man of Europe, according to The Economist. The Oxbridge elite term it the new sick man of Europe. Jobs dry up in East Germany. And of course, this is all happening at the same time as increasing European integration. And Glenn, over to you. You can talk about the international landscape right now: China, Russia, and the
So,
US.
so we had geostrategic revolution with the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall. We have political reunification of Germany, another historic event. Now, for a nation to absorb 1/3 of its population, about 40% perhaps, that has spent 40 years falling behind dramatically and evolving with radically different sense of the relationship of the individual to the state and to society, and the resentments that come from being viewed paternalistically because one is less wealthy. The challenges for Germany were dramatic, but then internationally, it wasn't simply, quote, simply the world historical event of the end of the Cold War, but you had a Russia that was prostrate, not prostate. That's my problem. Prostrate. I thought naively, here again, typical young professional's perspective, perhaps inexperienced one, and also what Europeans would say is a characteristically American bit of naivete. I thought, well, the Cold War is over. Russia has gotten rid of the Marxist Soviet, the Leninist totalitarian model, and it's freed itself, and it can now embrace rational economic and political and social policies, and we can work together. Well, more fool I, because I found almost invariably in all my interactions with Russian counterparts, and I worked a lot with the Russians in the 1990s, that they were completely unrehabilitated or unreformed. They remained fundamentally Russian. Surprise, which was resentful of the West, envious of the West, proud of Russia's empire and destiny, and they were largely unchanged in how they saw the world. So that led to then what we now are struggling with, an irredentist Russia that is seeking to keep the West from infecting it, from dominating it, and to recover its lost territories, glories, and power. At the same time, you have an irredentist Russia, as we all are agape about now, trying to cope with. You have, independent of the Trump phenomena, and whether it's fascist or irrational, you have nonetheless a more isolationist and less dominant United States. And you also have uh, the what's the word, the momentum of European integration, which drove Europe and German economic and political policies for decades, now stumbling as the economy stumbles, which Atul will talk about, and we'll talk about momentarily, and politically, integration becoming quite difficult when you have dozens of states, each of which has a veto on policy things become sclerotic quite quickly. And then you have the legacy of America and the Allies' success in building a post-war Germany, which is that the Germans themselves seem to have had, certainly for decades since the war, a now cultural phobia about asserting power. They don't want to be perceived as the imperial horrific threat that they were perceived as for so long. And that leads to a reticence to engage in any leadership in political, international, or defense issues, which Germany is struggling to overcome. Illustrative of that, one anecdote, I was meeting with counterparts of mine from German ministries and the German media 25 years ago. Time goes quickly. And they asked, the question was, well, what should Germany do about this or that? And it was a European issue. And I remember saying to them, I said, if Germany does not lead, Europe will not be led. And I frightened them because no German wanted to be in that position because they knew the anxieties and the opposition that would create. So the world has changed, and yet Germany now finds itself, in a way, alone and sovereign because the U.S. is no longer dictating terms because it's less willing to do so.
Excellent. So let's talk about current challenges. And before I do that, those of you who want to dive deeper into Russia or into German economic problems can look at the piece Glenn and I authored just before Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine on Vladimir Putin's long game. We looked at a number of philosophers and thinkers who inspire Putin and Russian irredentism. And there is a piece on the German economy, which I wrote, a rather long piece, is German economy destined to decline. You can find those pieces in the description. Now, on to current challenges. In some ways, the current challenges are a European malady. But the German malady is perhaps more severe because Germany is the economic heart of Europe. It is very much still the beating heart of Europe. So
I don't know if they're more severe, but they're more critical, certainly, because if Luxembourg doesn't reform, Europe can move forward.
Yeah.
If Germany does not reform, Europe will stagnate.
Exactly. So let's talk about the economy. If you look at the statistics of growth, in 2024, Germany had minus 0.2% growth. In 2023, it had minus 2.3% growth. And if you look at growth for the last few years, it has not exactly, in fact, going back to the 1990s, after 1989, yes, there was a period after the Hartz reforms, thanks to Gerhard Schroeder, and thanks to Gerhard Schroeder getting cheap energy from Russia, that Germany did well. Cheap energy from Russia, exports to China. Germany enjoyed a few good years. But again, after COVID, Germany is struggling. Growth is poor. The combination of three factors, external factors, let's talk about them. One of them is the Russia-Ukraine war, 2022, February 24, if I remember correctly, spikes energy costs, cuts off cheap energy from Russia. That hurts. Then, of course, Xi Jinping's zero COVID policy and the slowdown of growth in China means that you have a contracting Chinese economy, and Germany's biggest export market is China. So that affects Germany too. And at the same time, an increasingly protectionist US, which begins with Trump 1.0, the first Trump administration from 2017 to 2021. 2016 is the election, and then followed up under Joe Biden by the Inflation Reduction Act. And now, of course, the second Trump administration has even more tariffs. And so all of these factors, all three of these have hit Germany really hard.
They have. They have, and I'm remembering my French economics, and I'm struggling for the English term, but these are specifically conjonctural problems. These are sort of current issues that are real, significant, but they are current issues. I would advance that there are at least four structural, historic challenges that make put Germany particularly in a tight spot. We've touched upon them, I think, quickly, but just to summarize them, I hope in a cogent, way. There's the demographic problem. Now, how do economies grow? How does GDP grow? You can become larger as an economy in absolute terms, but Germany is already suffering from, or at least experiencing, suffering being a value-laden term, I suppose, from absolute population decline. By 2025. By 2050, the population will decline by something like 10% in absolute numbers. Births are far fewer than deaths. How does one compensate for that? Through immigration. We'll talk about immigration more in depth in a moment. But immigration raises uh, profound social, political, economic challenges if immigration rises uh, substantially above usually 10% of the native population of a country. In Germany, it's far above 10% of the native population of the country. The third thing is that competition has risen. The export model that has led to Germany's success, wealth, and power is export led, China being the central market. Today, China is the world's factory. China exports everywhere and more so every day in absolute and relative terms, and Germany is being frozen out by Chinese policies and outcompeted because of the dynamics of Chinese industrial policy and so on. And then finally, there's domestically, I'll call it regulatory sclerosis. It's a problem for many countries, but Germany may be the champion, sadly for Germany. And it's hard. This corporatist model of labor, industry, and government, which has been so successful, now with an increase of regulatory framework, has made change and economic development more challenging, harder to do. And those things underneath the the contemporary issues that Atul mentioned lead to a true crisis economically, socially, and politically for Germany, for Europe, and for the world.
So, Glenn, let me add some color and back your points with statistics. The first point Glenn made was about demography, and when we examine demography, the total fertility rate is 1.39%. Sorry, 1.39, not percent. I apologize. So it's 1.39. What does this mean? I mean, you need 2.2 births, TFR of 2.2 or 2.1 to achieve replacement level population. So Germany is declining. The German population is declining dramatically between 2025 to 2050. It's likely to go from 84 to 79 million. Now, the aging population is increasing phenomenally. So the median age is
Very
up,
important.
and the lowering of the worker pensioner ratio from 2.1 to 1.6 is likely to happen from 2025 to 2050. That means right now you have 2.1 people working to support one person, and it'll be 1.6 in just 25 years. And last time, right now, uh, there are last time Germany had more births than deaths was in 1970. 2024 saw deaths outpace births. There were 1 million deaths and there were 677,000 births. And they outpaced, so deaths outpaced births by almost 1.5 to 1. Net migration, we'll talk about migration later a little bit, but the share of the German population aged 65 plus rose from 16% in 1997 to 23% in 2023, which means 1 in 4 Germans is above 65. And the German
If I could
federal.
just jump in with For one moment on this worker to pensioner ratio and on the demographic shift and the rising median age and of pensioners, when the American equivalent of pension, the pension system, welfare state, was created in 1932, uh, we call it Social Security in the United States. There were, as I recall, 5 workers to every pensioner, and the pension fund didn't even kick in for something like 6 years. It was just saving money until it kicked in. Today in the United States, there's a similar problem of shifting demographics, and I think the ratio is 2 point something or other. It's higher than in Germany, but still it's insufficient to fund the pensions as the number of pensioners increases and the number of workers decreases in relative terms. And that will lead to, depends on a whole number of variables, but in the coming decades, if not decade, insolvency for the American pension system. What does one do then? Either pensioners won't have their pensions, or there'll be social trouble. There already is political trouble. And Germany's crisis in this specific regard is more acute still than that of the United States.
Well, Alex Gloy, our dear economist friend, tells us that the German federal pension system does not receive enough income to pay out pensions. It depends on a government subsidy. This subsidy currently stands at euro 113 billion. That figure dates to 2023. It is expected, this subsidy is expected to exceed euro 200 billion by 2040. So the federal pension system has reserves for less than 8 weeks. To prevent a collapse of the federal system, Germany has to attract foreign workers, and we'll get to that point. That's where immigration comes in, with contributions immediately being paid out to German retirees. Germany has one of Europe's largest low-wage job sector, with so-called mini jobs allowing employees to opt out of making contributions to the pension system, which many do, so that doesn't help. So foreign-born workers therefore enable Germany's low-wage sector to function: hospitality, restaurants, delivery services, healthcare services, but they keep wages artificially low, with Germans unwilling to work for low wages, preferring rather to collect social payments. And now we are hitting at both the need for immigration in an economy and the challenges it brings, which brings us very nicely onto the issue of immigration, the second structural issue of immigration. And as of now, the German population that is foreign born is 20.7%. The US, which is the land of immigrants, and I am a very recent immigrant, is 15.7%. So there are more immigrants in Germany now than in the US. Now, this is extremely important. This is extraordinarily important, because what this means now is that you have a lot of cheap labor, and you have you certainly have the advantages of the service sector, and a lot of low skill, as Alex Gloy says, the low wage job sector functioning well because of them. But it also means that it leads to downward pressure on wages. It leads to not lack of contributions to social security. We'll get to the political consequences of this. This leads to resentment. This leads to challenges in assimilation, and so on and so forth. So immigration at such a large level is causing problems. And also
here the United States has several lessons that one may learn to inform the experiences that all European states are now experiencing. If you look in American history, let's to simplify a bit, The first large surge of non-English or German immigrants to the United States was the huge influx of Irish Catholics in the 1840s because of the potato famine. What was the response? It was the birth of a know-nothing movement and an anti-immigrant movement, a hostility to the foreigner. The next big surge came in the 1890s and the 1900s, when pogroms, political crisis in the Russian Empire and Eastern Europe led to pogroms against the Jews and their flight, as well as economic struggles in Southern Europe led to Italian flight or emigration to the United States. So that the largest percentage of immigrants in the United States in history until today was about the year 1900, 1920. What was the reaction? It was to close the borders, blame the foreigners as anarchists and a danger to the fabric morally, culturally, politically of the republic, and shutting them down, and to many quasi-totalitarian political steps by the government of the time, not only in response to World War I's challenges, but because of those of immigration. When was the next great surge? It started in 1965 and has continued up to today, although it's now being stopped by the Trump administration. And what was the response? You can argue the whole Trump phenomena and the reaction against the immigrant. As Atul said, and I'll finish on this, what do the immigrants do, though? They keep wages low and they enable strong GDP growth, but they lead to social striation and tensions once a population of immigrants, it seems, it reaches about 10% of the overall population of the country.
Excellent, Glenn. That was a great summary. Now, there's the added factor of religion in the land of the 30 Years' War, where a third of the population, or by some estimates, 25 to 40%, died between 1618 and 1648, fighting
Or
over.
didn't die; they were killed.
They were killed. Sorry, killed. I stand corrected. They were killed, fighting over what is the right way to interpret Christ and what is the right way to be Christian. The Protestants and Catholics butchering each other. The fact that so many of the new immigrants are Muslim, and there is that element of religiosity amongst a lot of new immigrants, that is an added strength. But we will move swiftly on to the third factor that Glenn said. And Glenn, the third factor was competition. And this is super important because we've said before that Germany depends a lot on China exports to China. And in my article, I go through the figures in detail. We won't drown you with statistics. But going back to 2004, if I remember correctly, in 2005, those were years when I had a Chinese girlfriend. I was going a lot to the Middle Kingdom, and I was traveling a wee bit, and I found German businessmen everywhere. They were all exporting goods to China. By the 20th century, China was Germany's most important trading partner. Bilateral trade volumes amounted to $237 billion, 204 billion euros in 2018. In fact, in 2019, DHL published a piece titled, "As China Sneezes, Will Germany Catch a Cold?" And DHL, of course, is a logistics company. And what has happened is that China has not just sneezed. Not only has Chinese demand for German goods gone down, um, but this reliance on the Chinese market has been replaced by massive competition from China. Let's take the example of electric vehicles. Daimler bought a 9.1% stake in Tesla in 2009 for 50 million, but sold it in 2014 for 780 million. Today's value would be 130 billion. Now, this partnership was meant to give Daimler access to Tesla's battery and drivetrain technology for Mercedes electric vehicles. A-Class, E-Cell, etc. But Daimler said it wanted to build its own EV program. Well, that hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, German vehicle production declined from 6 million vehicles in 2015 to 4 million in 2023, a decline of a third. New car registrations peaked above 4 million in 1991, the reunification boom, but it was only 2.8 million in 2024. And Germany has been locked in older technologies, diesel cars, for instance, a long-time German favorite. They've suffered scandals. Now only less than a third are bought by individuals, with commercial buyers buying two-thirds of diesel cars. Partly, of course, is the German tax code. We'll get to that later. But the main thing is that Chinese electric cars and a lot of Chinese companies' progression up the value chain has meant that they are eating German products for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now you have BYD in China. Now you have a whole plethora of Chinese cars that are electric cars. China has become the new, they were petro states, and now it is the new electric state. And Germany's economy is, frankly, increasingly caught in a time warp. German economy has not been able to compete even on the software front. The last software company that came out of Germany is SAP in 1972. That's where.
Well,
yeah, please, sir.
That's a very important point. You say even on the software front, I would say let's focus in particular on the software front and things of that nature. What Germany is suffering from the dilemma that in some ways parts of the U.S. industry have, but all economies do, which is its export model was based on one export, sensibly enough, but on technological superiority and manufacturing capability. The Germans have always been among the finest producers, or the finest producers in the world for high technology quality products, be they electronic or automotive and so on. But that's no longer the case. The Chinese, in particular, have matched or exceeded in capabilities the German industries and techniques, and Germany has been falling into an almost inevitable trap. That is an error that the Trump administration is making, to think that, and Margaret Thatcher in some ways did too, to think that, well, we will recover our industrial base and we'll be great again that way. But an economy is great if it's an advanced, wealthy economy, by being at the cutting edge of economic and technological development, not at producing, making products that are no longer technologically leading. The automotive industry is a cutting edge industry in the electric vehicle sector, but not in the internal combustion engine sector. And there are manufacturing processes and so on and so forth involved in that. So Germany has not, as you said, Atul, been a leader for 50 years, I guess it is, in new economic technological developments. That's been the secret of America's success, of any economy's success, and that's what the Trump policies are undermining in the United States, and that's the crisis that the Germans are facing acutely now.
Yeah, they in a way, Glenn, they were prisoners of their own success. Their model worked.
Absolutely.
They optimized it. They had sunk costs, and they remain locked into these older technologies, the internal combustion engine, machine tools, all of that. And the new tech innovation leaders in China, you have this focus on solar power, batteries, electric vehicles. You also have a big investment in AI, quantum infusion. I don't understand these things, but I suspect, they may come to play a big role. And in Silicon Valley, you had a whole series of innovations when it came to online connectivity, online productivity, as well as the new personal computer, as well as software for the cell phone. All of that is basically Google, which is Android, and Apple. And data is the new oil, and that basically is either with Silicon Valley or it is when it comes to China with the big Chinese companies in their own ecosystem. So, in a nutshell, competition. Germany was caught napping, and let's do the fourth issue you mentioned. And the fourth issue really is regulation. And that is something, it's a self inflicted wound. And none other than the previous Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who belonged to the SPD, the center left party, declared in the Bundestag that his intention was to shake off the mildew of bureaucracy, risk aversion, and despondency that has settled on our country over years and decades. So when your left-leaning prime minister admits that bureaucracy is a problem, red tape is a problem, you have to cut through red tape, then you know it is a big problem. Manufacturers have been complaining about taxes and labor costs. Firing someone in Germany is impossible, as my German friends who run companies constantly confide and complain. High taxation is also a big issue. There is now an acute shortage of workers, and indeed now skilled workers. The apprenticeship model is under strain, and as we've said already, there is there is so much of red tape that inhibits the digital economy and digital infrastructure as well. There are all these privacy requirements. So to steal a word from Scholz's, the previous chancellor's speech, he gave the speech in relation to foreign relations, and he said that the economy faces a Zeitenwende, a historic turning point, and the German economy does. And to his credit, the new chancellor, Christopher Merz, is trying. But it is decades of rot. It is decades of a mindset, indeed, decades of a cultural phenomenon, and it is hard for any chancellor to come snap his fingers in the German coalition system and change that. So the four structural reasons that Glenn talked about, we've covered all of them, and I suspect, Glenn, it's time to move on to the political and the international.
Right. Well, the international I've touched upon some, but
Let me
I
do the
think
political very quickly. Rifle through the political
sure.
changes.
Yeah. I'll tee it up for you that we all of us most easily see the political struggles. Those are what make most of the headlines, but they're really all the product. The political issues are the product of these deeper structural points that we've been talking about, and the political crisis is. Well, like President Eisenhower said to President Kennedy after the Cuban Missile Crisis, if a problem were easy, it would have been solved, and the only problems that reach the desk of the Oval Office are problems that don't have a solution, and that's the challenge for all political leaders, and that's the challenge that the German nation is facing now, the political crisis.
Very well said. Or rather, Eisenhower put it very well. You've quoted him most aptly. Uh, let's talk about what's happening in politics. It is a global phenomenon. It's not unique to Germany, but polarization that you see in France, that you see in India, that you see in the US, that is there in Germany too. In Germany, it is regional as well, just as it is here in the US. You have a south and north divide, you have a midwest and coastal divide. In Germany, you have an east-west divide. You also have a fragmentation of politics in a proportional representation system, which means parties get a certain percentage of votes, and in Germany the threshold is 5%, and they get 5% of the seats in Parliament or Bundestag. And what we are seeing is the emergence of the right, also an emergence of the left. There's a very interesting figure of Sahara Wagenknecht. We will talk about her a little bit. But AFD, Alliance für Deutschland, Alliance for Germany, as of now, it is polling ahead of the bloc of Chancellor Christopher Merz. The CDU-CSU, Christian Democratic Union, and Christian Socialist Union is polling at 24-25%, and the AFD is polling ahead at 26-27%. By the way, everyone calls them neo-Nazi, but now remember, they are not led by a tiny corporal with a funny mustache. They are led by a woman, a blonde woman, who is lesbian and whose partner is Sri Lankan. And if I remember correctly, the partner lives in Switzerland. So, things change over time. This would not have been kosher 100 years ago, or let's say in the 1930s. But hey ho, there we go. No other party is willing to form a coalition with the AfD. As of now, it lacks the votes to reach a majority. But individual states, especially in former East Germany, could see AfD-led governments. And the rise of the AfD is really scaring a country with nightmares about Adolf Hitler, where the history is still very alive, and German guilt is a phenomenon, and German reticence to move to the right is very real. At the same time, you're having a move, as you did, by the way, in the 1920s and 30s, towards communism. You're seeing a move to the left as well. People are becoming more extreme. Sahara Wagenknecht got 4.98% of the vote. So her party just missed the 5% threshold. Her party is Buenos Sahara Wagenknecht, which is entirely focused on her own persona. So she's a populist figure of the left. She is from Jena, East Germany. She was born to an Iranian German couple. Her father went missing in Iran. She very much is a lady of the left. She has become more Eurosceptic. She is anti-immigration. She opposes Germany being dragged into the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And so this polarization that we are seeing in Germany, we can see it at a more advanced level in France, where you don't even have a government, but it is very real. It is worrying Germany. And there is a very strong resentment on the part of the AfD of having more immigrants, particularly Islamic immigrants, having Muslim immigrants. And a chap called Elon Musk spoke at their convention, which has worried Germans even more, especially after giving his Nazi salute. J.D. Vance has also spoken out in favor of AfD. He went and met them, I believe, after the Munich Security Conference. So Germans are uneasy, and it's also AfD is also anti-EU. So it's anti-immigrant, anti-EU, and this brings into question whether Germany, whether EU, whether Europe, the Europe question. And over to you now, Glenn. I've teed it up to you for the international. But before, just one parting comment: the traditional parties like the SPD and the Liberals are declining. The CDU-CSU is also under threat. It's the same phenomenon in a way as France. But with a proportional representation system, you could very well eventually have a dysfunctional polity, just as you do in the Netherlands, where it takes 6 months to form a government, or indeed Israel, another proportional representation model. So over to you, Glenn. Now, please educate us about the international environment.
Well, before we turn to the future, just
the international environment, and then we turn to future scenarios.
Well, I did touch upon the international stuff before, so that gives me three things then to do quickly on the international thing. So aspects of this, I think, as I mentioned, as Germany deals with increasing challenge and turmoil, the economic, social, political, regulatory, governmental points we discussed, the international situation has changed. Now, Germany has always had to look east and west because it's in the middle of Europe. And you have, and as I said, and Atul also did, an irredentist Russia, a Russia that is seeking to restore its imperium in Central Europe and be a global power. And which being Russia, views Western norms, political and cultural, as existential threats to the essence of what it is to be Russian. You have China, which could dominate all the cutting edge technologies and markets, almost, that's not an exaggeration, in the coming decade if there is not a strong response either of protectionism or renaissance and in various economic practices. And then you have Europe, its other member states, struggling with many of the same social, economic, political challenges of immigration, regulation, overregulation.
Then, may I make a very quick
Um,
point there about overregulation? We
sure.
mentioned, of course, the standard European penis last time. We won't do that this time. But what we'll point, the Brussels desire to meddle into everything. But the EU is coming under a lot of flack in many European countries, including France and Germany, the two drivers of the EU. And that is partly because there is this perceived overregulation. Now, the EU has achieved a single market. That's a great achievement. A single currency. That's a phenomenal achievement. But never before in history has any entity managed to achieve a monetary union without a fiscal union. So that there is a contradiction within the EU. And then there are these regulations that really attract popular ire, such as the undetachable bottle cap that Alex Gloy points out, EU Directive 2019-904. Now, pictures of these have been posted on social media saying that the EU is hostile to innovation. Then, of course, more recently, the war on sausage, which was in Yes Minister, by the way, ages ago, as political satire. But now this is a case of life imitating art. And in October 2014, the European Court of Justice of the European Union ruled that EU member states cannot ban plant-based products from using traditional meat terms. Sausage, steak, burger, as long as the labels aren't misleading and clearly state that the product is plant-based. Brussels didn't sit long on its hands for long. The Eurocrats, the term for Brussels, European bureaucrats, on October, they got together on 8 October 2025, or October 8, 2025, the European Parliament voted in favor of an amendment that would ban terms like sausage, burger, steak, and escalope being used to market plant-based products. A lot of people think this is rearranging the deck chairs while the Titanic is sinking. This is much ado
Well,
about nothing.
but there's a deep, these are illustrative of a deep sociological and thus political reaction and perception. One of the factors, the major factor, arguably, in Brexit and in Great Britain's leaving the European Union was, and I heard this an infinite number of times from British friends, that they wanted to drink a pint of beer instead of a half liter. And, and they, oh, what, really? But yes, and they wanted to have their houses painted by an Englishman instead of a Polish immigrant. So the deeper point is hostility to, one, there are problems from regulation, but hostility to decisions that affect our day-to-day lives and our structural lives made by outsiders, by Brussels, the bureaucrats in Brussels. And the German reaction is in part the same thing. There's the sociological component of the rise of the far right and the far left, a fear of rejection of the other being the immigrant who is not born in Germany, and a turn, and this is recurring process in political history, to tribalism, to the nationalism, to blood and soil politics. That is what fascist politics are based on. That is what Nazi politics are based on. That's what the Trump phenomenon is based on. And the far right in France and the far right in Germany. And the far left, too, a rejection of the elites who have exploited all of us innocent victim average people. And this is the context that German society and the German political world has to struggle with, as with everywhere. But we're talking about Germany now. So, what is likely to come of all of this bubbling, churning turmoil and increasing sclerosis, really, politically and economically?
So,
Well,
so now we move to future scenarios, Glenn.
we're going to try.
The third
I
and
think
final part
that
of the episode of the
right
podcast. Now, the
could be
perhaps,
very short since
yeah,
we don't know.
yeah, perhaps the most difficult, and but we'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
We'll give it a go.
I think, come what may, all of these problems are real, but all societies always have existential problems that don't have solutions, and most societies will muddle through to some sort of a new equilibrium, imperfect as it will be. So I think that, come what may, Germany will remain. For as far as we can project, the engine of Europe. That might be unfortunate because if it's not much, if the engine's not driving very powerfully, then Europe and Germany are in problems. But there's no escape. Germany is the largest, the most economically powerful, and that will remain to be the case, even with all of these challenges. But I do think that the most likely future then is not some sort of apotheosis and Athena is not going to descend from Mount Olympus and smite some foe and solve problems. It's probably the status quo will continue to evolve, which means the continued slow fragmentation and decline, relatively, of the German economy vis-a-vis other economies, which is largely China and the U.S., um, and political um, inability to cohere enough to make structural changes that would lead to the essential change of the German problem. I think that's by far the most likely
Mm,
future that Germany has.
yeah, I mean, I have a darker view, Glenn. I foresee trouble a bit like Macbeth's witches, though I hope I'm not a witch and I hope no one burns me at the stake. Uh, I see, as you said, yes, there'll be fragmentation and decline. And in the case of Germany, that's complicated by the federal nature. You have the upper house and the lower house. We won't drown people in detail, but if the AfD wins a number of states, then it can block things even in the upper house, not just the lower house. And so there will be some fragmentation and decline. Um, this one scenario: coherent government, regulatory reform, immigration reform, leadership in the EU. You said 25% likely, or something thereabouts. Yes. The other scenario, at least a period of fragmentation and decline, probably 75% likely, because of political fragmentation. It's not just the AfD, and we forgot to mention the German Dava party, and Dava literally means proselytizing to Islam, getting people to be inspired by the Quran and the life of Prophet Muhammad. Then it has Turkish roots, and the Dava chairman Tevfik Özcan, if I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he denounced Serap Güler of the center-right CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, for wearing a short skirt. And so you've got all these. You've got Sarah Wagenknecht pulling in one direction, uh, drawing upon people with nostalgia for the German Democratic Republic and communism. You've got AfD, which is pulling people in another direction. You've got Dava chairman, and remember, the Turks in Germany voted 67%. 2 out of 3 of them voted for Erdogan, which is Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, which is a much higher figure than in Istanbul, where Erdogan actually lost the election. So you have all this fragmentation going on, and and that is going to be a challenge. And one of the things that has affected the US in particular, which is inequality, but it is also affecting Germany, is that Germany now has more than 1 million millionaires. And the list of the 100 richest Germans is now populated with people who simply inherited wealth. built by their parents in post-war recovery. So the center-right slogan, Leistung muss sich wieder lohnen, I hope I'm pronouncing it somewhat correctly. We need to encourage entrepreneurial activity, or entrepreneurialism has increasingly become a fig leaf for tax cuts for big corporations. And apparently there are huge tax loopholes for the rich. More importantly, German society has fossilized, and the upward mobility of post-war years has died. Young families are struggling and see little reason to bring kids into this world. And so Germany has massive issues. Political cohesion, touched about it. Regulatory sclerosis, we've touched about it. Economic innovation, we've talked about it. Immigration problem, we've talked about it. And so what is the prediction? Perhaps it is time now, Glenn, that you read out what our friend Alex Gloy has to say.
Not quite, although I'm looking forward to that. But I think, certainly ironically, perhaps tragedy is the inevitable, the unavoidable condition of structural or substantive change. I think we can all take a lesson uh, and broaden it beyond economics from Thomas Piketty's book Capital, and he really convincingly shows that the only times in human history, not modern economic history, but in the history of civilizations, that there has been a fundamental redistribution of wealth that has undone an otherwise inexorable concentration of wealth and political power in a given society, has come from moments of existential crisis. You can go, it's like the Roman Empire. The Republic failed. What was the crisis of the Roman Empire? It was political and structural, based on the increasing concentration of wealth in 200 families and the reduction to literal below subsistence level existence of the rest of the population, and thus revolts and unrest. And Caesar tried to change that. What happened was 50 years of civil wars and the destruction of the Republic, which then led to a new equilibrium and some redistribution of wealth. The only time this has happened in,
and if I may add, later when Christianity comes under Constantine, in a way it is like early socialism. Blessed are the poor, and it talks a lot about the poor. And in a way, it is a socialist revolution that sweeps through the Roman Empire, that originates, ironically, in the Holy Land, modern day Israel, Palestine, or Palestine in the last century, modern day Israel. And no, modern day still West Bank, Palestine. So anyway, but long story short, it sweeps all the way and is co-opted as the state religion. So it's interesting how the Roman Republic first collapses, and then, of course, the empire itself becomes de facto, at least in theory, a socialist state like the Soviet Union or Communist Party CCP, the Chinese Communist Party of China.
I won't go. I won't go through 2,000 years of history, but from the Romans up to the modern era, the foundations of Marx's analysis was the industrialization, of course, and the progressive concentration of wealth and exploitation, yes, of the working class, as he called it, of workers. And the only way that this fundamentally changed, was from the cataclysm of World War I and II. And from that utter destruction in Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, and elsewhere, came a redistribution of political power and wealth, or rather wealth and thus political power. The only exception, apparently, to this, relatively speaking, known, where there has been a substantial redistribution of wealth, which led to the golden era of American history, was in post-Depression and World War II America, from 1932 to 1980, when the election of Ronald Reagan, which started to undo all of this. When there was, in response to what was a dramatic social, political, economic crisis, the Depression and then World War II, a profound redistribution of wealth and empowerment in absolute terms of the working and middle classes of the United States. This is all being undone now for the past 45 years, slowly, and it's also the dynamic is occurring in Germany and in France and in all of the in all economies and societies. But the crisis that Germany faces from the East politically, from the Far East economically, and from within itself culturally and socially, and from Europe in a regulatory organizational sense, is so acute that it is conceivable that the German system respond in a way that could address the fundamental problems we have iterated to some significant extent. But history offers a lot of cautionary pessimism in that regard, but there is that possibility. And so I see that as less likely, obviously more desirable than the continued slow sclerosis, but only through crisis will come fundamental change for Germany.
Excellent. I would concur. I think you've summarized very well. I think all the problems that you say, the challenge from the East, the Far East, the relationship with Brussels, which is both a boon and can be a bane, challenges with the US retreating from NATO, retreating to its shores, and indeed the ticking demographic time bomb with its pressure on pensions and the surge in immigration, particularly Islamic immigration. How do you digest a religion that does not have, at least in doctrine, the theory, the separation between church and state in a modern secular liberal society? That indeed is it's not just Germany, that's going to be the operative question for Europe, as the historian Tom Holland has said, and the jury's out how all of this will play out. So the prediction, perhaps time now to ring down the curtain,
Sure.
and Glenn, you are a much better
Right.
reader with a better voice.
Well, I don't know, but I'm going to read a note that our colleague Alex Gloy sent us, which I think is wise, and I might characterize it in advance as uh, optimism through apocalypse or idealism through apocalypse. I don't really know. Um, uh, I'm not sure how likely it is, but here's what a deeply informed and perceptive uh, analyst and observer of Germany's dilemma, the German problem, and the European challenges thinks in response to all of these factors that we've sort of laid out on the table. And this is what Alex writes. The revolution will come anyway, either by the street, where extreme elements will fight for control of the narrative. We're seeing this in the US and elsewhere now, aren't we? Or from the top down. A revolution driven by the street will likely have a far right tint, as their supporters outnumber far left activists. A top down revolution would involve the dissolution of national governments, which are hated anyway, and Brussels' bureaucratic overhead. The solution could be a United States of Europe or a Europe of 50 regions, where 50 regions of approximately equal populations, say 10 million each, enjoy vast self governing rights and giving more power to minorities within current national states. Politics would become much more local, with constituents more likely to get involved and less disenfranchised. And a Europe of regions would have only one supranational military, with common planning and procurement, decentralized production, but centralized command. There would have to be a charter of minimum common rules to ensure functioning, and there would be no need then for national borders. End quote. I think this is would be a happy future, but I think that the world has few idealistic solutions when power comes to play.
On that note, we will see you again, and in our next podcast, we will look at France Until then, if you've enjoyed listening to us, make sure you follow us on whatever medium uh, you're currently using, whether it is YouTube, whether it is Spotify, whether it is Apple Podcasts, whether it is Amazon. And make sure you sign up for our newsletter. Go to fairobserver.com/newsletter and sign up for our newsletters. And of course, if you have a geopolitical question, if you are worried about political risk, contact us at FOI and we'll be happy to answer to the best of our ability whatever you're worrying about. Until then, from me, the Rajput, bye for now.
Auf Wiedersehen, meine Freunde.